So I want to show off a little tool I've been working on, and it is based on and kind of extends a great tool that probably many of you are aware of called mock service workers. And mock service workers, uh, industry standard API mocking for JavaScript. It allows you to introduce a service worker within your application. So you're working on an Angular application, a React application, a Vue application, any type of browser based application, and you want to have some code that kind of comes between your application code and the API. And there's various reasons you'd want to do that. So the first step in using my new tool is to come here, read the guides, learn how to install it for your particular framework, etc. What I have is an Angular application, and I already have mock service workers installed and ready to go. So what I'm showing you today is this tool called MSW Lens, and that's at this URL. And I think, yeah, here it is. It's got instructions on how to install it, various commands to run, and an explanation of how this actually works and some things you can do with it. There's a little bit of configuration you can add. I mostly work on some conventions, but you don't have to stick with those conventions. In the docs folder, there's a little bit more detail here if you want to go in and look at these in more detail. But this video and the README should probably be enough to get you started. So a little bit about mock service workers and what my tool, this MSW Lens, adds here. So the MSW Lens, the first thing it does, and this is really what I was building it for, is it allows you to switch between different scenarios. So for example, you might have a component you're working on, a React component, an Angular component, whatever, and it's making a GET request to a server to get a list of something. And sometimes that server is going to return just a couple things. Sometimes it might return an empty list. Sometimes it might return hundreds of things. And it's our job as user interface developers to create the components in a way that accommodate all those late bound variations of the data. It could also be that we run into situations where the API is slow. Occasionally we get errors with the API. We might want to do retries, something like that. And we have to have tools that allow us to simulate that against our API. Another thing might be you have APIs that you're developing against, and they're either slow, they're kind of harshing your flow here a little bit, or in some cases, maybe you have to pay to use them. Maybe you need some kind of API key or something like that. So what you might do, so in this example, I have a little component in Angular I created that's using an NGRX signal store. It really doesn't matter what your code is here, but using this as an example because it's some code I have handy. And the dotted line here represents your browser. Without something like mock service workers, whatever code's calling your API, maybe you're using Tanstack query, just HTTP fetch or whatever is calling, that's going straight out to this existing API. So what mock service workers allows you to do, kind of in a in-between spot between still running in your browser, but between your browser and this API, is you can inject, let's do it that way, this mock service worker. So these run as service workers within your browser, and kind of give them some expectations. So you could say, hey, intercept the GET request to this existing API and return data with this delay or with these number of elements. You write these different scenarios that intercept a request and return whatever you want. You want to see what your thing does if you get an error, etc. So you don't have to change any of your code. As far as your code knows, it's still calling that API, but here we have a test double, a mock, right? So you could do that for one endpoint at a time. You could do it for all endpoints, etc. You can just intercept those routes. So you end up coming up with lots of these little scenarios, like I want to see what this looks like if there's nothing in their shopping cart, if there's 5 things in their shopping cart, if there's 100 things in their shopping cart. Maybe the API you're working on is an external API, and sometimes it returns weird malformed data, and you want to make sure the code you're writing to accommodate that deals with it. Mock service workers is the go-to tool for doing that kind of thing. But the thing is, you end up with lots of different variations, and just with a GET request, you might have 4 or 5 variations. And Switching between those means you have to go modify the code each time, et cetera. It can get a little tedious, and frankly, it's friction in a place that you shouldn't have friction because this is the kind of work that I think really helps with the value of your deliverable application. The more of this you do, the better your application is going to be, the better you're going to sleep at night, the less runtime errors, all that kind of stuff. Um, so that was the first thing I wanted was just a tool that lets me switch between those scenarios. I'm going to show you that in a moment. One other scenario, though, is often, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm getting ahead of an existing API, right? So this is maybe an API. It's the same API, but with some additions, right? The API people haven't written the code for a particular thing, like maybe this patch request that we're going to do doesn't exist yet. So mock service workers could intercept that, and we don't have to wait around for this thing to be done. Very often in my work, because I do a lot of work alone, I'm a loner. I'm a rebel dot. Anyhow, I start off with this. All these requests go through mock service workers, and there is no API to call. So everything's handed here locally. But then when I go to work on the API, I have a pretty good sense of exactly what I'm going to need. So it's that scenario I'm going to work with here. And either one works. If you have existing APIs, you can introduce this to get between you and the API. The switcher will let you bypass. So if you have an existing API, you can go directly to that API. So I've already installed, according to the instructions here on how to install this, it's npm install, install it as a developer dependency, Hypertheory Labs, MSW Lens, suggested some scripts you might put inside your package JSON just to help you work with this. There's an init script. You use that to initialize the tool. There's MSW Lens, which just runs one time. And it allows you to pick which of the variations you want and then just kind of quits. I like to use the watch version of this, which just runs in a loop. So you can kind of switch back and forth. This and lens context thing I'll come to in a moment after I get this set up, because the lens context thing is the second part of this, which is it's nice to be able to switch between these various scenarios, but it's also kind of a drag to write them. They tend to be really kind of redundant. And I miss things. Like there's scenarios I should have that that an AI or something like that can come up with. So again, the premise is the more of these you have, the better your code's going to be. So I'm going to show you how you might use this. So back in my little project here, it is an Angular application, as I said. I'm going to start this thing up. So little start. Let's see what that looks like. It's at 4202. And I have this episodes thing, but there's nothing going to show up here. It's supposed to show a list of episode. It's calling actually into itself, like I'm anticipating like a back end for front end pattern, but it's making some requests to some remote APIs. And I want to use mock service workers and this MSW lens to deal with this. So in my Angular application, there is a component, this watchlist.ts. That's what you're seeing on the screen there. It's going to show all the episodes, keep track of which ones we've watched, etc. Have a little form where we can add a new show, all that kind of stuff. And it's using an NGRX signal store. Again, it doesn't matter what your code's using. If it's an Angular application, a React application, whatever, what you do is I'm going to go to a terminal here is I'm going to run first off this lens init command. So npm run msw or lens init. And when you do that, it's going to output a little bit of stuff, and it creates again, by convention, you can change where it does this stuff in this mocks folder. It has a active scenarios and this bypassed endpoints. These other ones I already had in there, just kind of standard setup for mock service workers here. It also creates this MSW lens directory.msw lens with this context markdown. I'm going to come back and talk about that after we have something interesting in here. So remember, what we're seeing is this watch list component, right? And what I'm going to do is just take that, maybe copy the relative path here, and I'm going to run a thing. We'll do npm run lens context. In other words, I'm going to give MSW Lens context for what I want it to look at. And so this is that package you install. What it's going to do is when you give it the path to this thing, it's going to look at this component. It's going to follow the imports for basically anything that isn't coming from node modules. So it's going to look at my store. It's going to create a prompt that will go in here that we can give whatever AI we're using so it can generate our endpoints for us, right? So when I run this thing, right, runs really fast. All you end up with is in this MSW lens. One thing it does, and I'll show you what this is for in a bit, it updates this context so you can see that, what's going on here. But inside of prompts, this watchlist.md, what this is a prompt you can give your friendly neighborhood LLM. Done it with Claude. I do it with GPT. I've done it with Gemini. I don't mess with Grok, but I'm probably would work there, though it might call you woke or something. You can do whatever you want. So this is just what you feed to your AI. So I'm just going to copy this sucker. Maybe, you could point it at the file, but I'm going to use Claude for this one and let that start up. There we go. And clean context, nothing in here, and just paste in that prompt. So let's see what it does. This will take a bit of time because it has to figure out what's going on. It's inspecting the code I gave it, and it's going to have to create mock service worker handlers for the get scenario, a post scenario, and a patch scenario where we mark things as done. So I'll probably speed this up when I edit the video, but it'll take a bit of time. All right. So this is what it came out with. I'm going to give it permission to access my folder, but it says, hey, based on what you showed me, I need some endpoints here. One called API shows. It looked at my signal store here. So it'll look at whatever code you're using. Am I saying that often enough? This isn't just an Angular specific thing, but it looked at on my store. My store is doing things like doing a fetch to API shows. There's another one where it's doing, this is the load episodes. There's load shows, load episodes. So it looked at that, knew it had to create these things. There's an add show, which is doing a post to API shows. That's what you're seeing there. And then for episodes, there's a patch inside here that lets us toggle whether we've watched a particular episode or not. So it did that. And it says, I've have the manifest, all the four, they wrote them now, wrote these manifests out, etc. And those are what you can see. It's actually still working here. So in Mox, it created shows and episodes. It's working on shows right now. There's this YAML file. I'm going to show you what that's for in a moment. It's actually kind of a cool thing and a little weird, and I want to talk about it, but it's super useful. So it wrote this little get handler, right? Kind of creepy, actually. I'm a big fan of all those shows. I feel so seen. Andor, Better Call Saul, and Severance. I'm actually rewatching Better Call Saul with my son right now. And, created some endpoints for that. And then for episodes, you can see it generated some sample data for that. And I think it's probably about done. So let me let it finish. Yeah, Claude's giving me a nice report. This might look a little different depending on what LLM you're using here, but Claude gave me a nice report on what it did. And it's already telling me, like, hey, I looked at your code and you need some error handling here, brother. We'll get to that in a bit. Submit check and check boxes aren't disabled in flight. You know, there's some suggestions it's already coming up with based on my design. I'm not going to worry about that yet. Let's just see what it did. So now I can just run this lens watch thing. And what it's going to do is say, oh, I found these endpoints, and these are the scenarios I'm using for each one of those. So the AI came up with these scenarios. So that get request, there's a scenario it came up with called typical here. So if I click or hit enter on that, it came up with a scenario that's typical, just some shows. If you want to see what an empty response looks like, if you want to see what a really big response looks like, a slow response, one that never resolves. So that prompt gives it some hints, but it also trusts the local AI, the one that's interpreting that prompt, to look at the code and figure out what it needs. So a server error, something blows up at the server. What if you're supposed to be logged in on this? It doesn't know that that's a possibility. You can say, I don't need that, but it will put it in there by default and then bypass. If you had a real API, you could pick bypass here and it wouldn't use your mock service workers at all. So I'm going to go with typical here. And then, so that's the get shows. And for the post, it's going to do same thing, bunch of different scenarios it came up with. I'm going to stick with the success, a success on the patch, and a get on API show episodes. So now if I go to the UI, let's see how it did. So you can see this is what I was showing you before. This is that sample application. We're on episodes. It has a little form here to let us add a show. I'm going to admit, I had AI do this, and I don't like doing things like disabling ad buttons and all that stuff, but we'll get there. So there's severance, and the idea is, yeah, I can do this stuff. I can say, yeah, I watched that sucker. I watched both of these, and yeah, so it's saying on Severance, I watched three of those, and like maybe want to watch that one again. So two of three, all that stuff. And if I add a show, maybe shrinking 2026. I don't know who who created that. Right, so that was a little post scenario, and it gets added to the bottom. I didn't go as far as being able to add shows to or episodes to a show, but you kind of get it. So if I go back to my Visual Studio Code here, I can say, all right, I may be on get shows. I want to do slow, right? So if I switch to that, and I'm just going to refresh the page here, you can see I've got a little skeleton loading thing here. It's one of the things I might actually change this in the generated prompt. I think anybody that's used any LLM for a while knows its sense of time is a little weird. That's slow for an LLM, but I could either tell it, I could just go here and tell, hey, Claude, that's slow. That's not very slow. But I could also go into the YAML file here. So this shows get YAML. It kind of explains, this is what this is. This is a collection. Here's a description, what we're expecting to return. There's some source hints on the files here that it should modify, etc. And there's typical, empty, slow. And the delay here is like a real delay, which isn't very slow. I'm going to tell it to do, I don't know, maybe I'll just do 3 seconds and save that. Delay. Let it do its thing. And really, you can just tell it, hey, I changed the manifest update, but just so you know a little bit more about what's going on here, right? It interpreted 3 seconds to be three. And if I go back now, let's see how we did. That feels a little better. We can see what's going on with that, right? I could go on this patch request and a validation error. So when I mark one of these things as complete, right, we're getting nothing's happening. The user's not seeing anything because what's happening behind the scenes is, let me actually refresh here so we can see that clean. And on the network tab, maybe I'll clear that out, right? Patch gave a 422, right? That was what it did, but we probably want to give the user some indication something went wrong there. We can do the same thing with adding a show, all that kind of good stuff. So in that, it's a pretty cool tool to be able to do this stuff. And then you can iterate with your AI, say, hey, can we make this better based on these particular things? And I'm not going to go that far, actually, because the next tool I want to show, and I'll do this one in the next video, it is Angular specific, but it's actually going to give our API or AI, pardon me, a little bit more context about what's going on with this application, and let us see what's going on inside so it can really do a better job of helping us create a more resilient, better user experience. So I encourage you to try this out. It's early, it's MIT licensed. I invite you to, file issues, uh, send PRs, all that kind of stuff. It's up here at github.com, Hypertheory Labs, MSW Lens. Pretty well documented. So let me know what you think.